Namaskar and welcome to our series of programs on the Indian economy on the road to economic revival. In this episode, we are going to be talking about services and how services have been impacted by the lockdown because of COVID and how it is repositioning itself according to the new normal. Participating in this program, we have done three separate one-on-one interviews with Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal, who's the Principal Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India, Dr. Arvind Veermani, eGrow Foundation Chairman, as well as an eminent economist, and we also have Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, who is the President of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. So let's begin. How seriously has services been impacted by COVID-19?
So it depends what kind of services you're talking about. Services are catch-all.
Talking about all services across the board.
So there are services, for example, that function quite well. Stuff that can be done online or using electronic systems. For example, the sector you are in, media, is not been maybe affected as much as many other sectors. But say tourism has been absolutely devastated. So one has to look at which sectors. Now, some of these sectors will come back. I think travel will come back because people do eventually need to move around and so on. But I think leisure tourism, for example, will perhaps take a long time to get back. And it's very difficult, by the way, to help this sector as well. For example, some people say, why don't we give them tax breaks? Well, and give them a GST break. So let's say we do actually remove GST. How does it help? Do you know anybody who's not going on a holiday because of GST? No. So the point is, it's sometimes very difficult also to think through how to help the sector, even if you know that you want to target some support. So this is something difficult, but I would say as the lockdown unwinds, significant things will come back. And we are already seeing recovery in certain areas quite quickly.
So there are what I define as contact services, which are the most dangerous in terms of spread of the virus. So we have to be very, very extra careful. What are these sectors? Where the problem is acute is what I call mass market retail. Unlike in developed countries, even our wholesale market actually mass markets. You'll have tons of people milling around. I'm afraid there is no way in which we can control the spread of the virus through these mass markets. So we'll have to constrain them for a much longer period than anything else. The others, like public transport, the transport, airlines, buses, have to be more careful. The question is, can we impose reasonably restriction on this? If you can do it, if you have a train, for example, the railways can impose these kind of restrictions, which I said, where you take the temperature, etc., where force marks. If you can't do it, if they are private buses where anybody will do what they want, I'm afraid again, keep them closed for some time. So the key issue is, can we realistically impose and sustain restrictions which minimize the spread of the virus? If we can, those can be opened up gradually. If we can't, they will have to be kept closed for a longer period.
So there is no sector which has been more impacted by COVID, as you all know. But just to give you, a few statistics in terms of the sectors per se, the trade, hotels and restaurants, about 5 million jobs were at risk. Their revenue has been, it's not just affected, it is zero.
Yes.
Few of them manage 5%. Aviation, again, another significant sector. So I think that each one of and then healthcare. If you look at the entire healthcare sector, there was a period of about 60 days where hospitals were running at under 10% occupancy. They could not let go of their staff because the few patients who did come, you had to take care of them entirely. And therefore, you need radiology, you need theater staff, you need housekeeping, you need F&B, you need the entire ecosystem to work, whether it's 10 patients or 150 patients. And then came the additional load or the burden of taking care of COVID patients.
Yes.
And this came risk, fear, additional cost of PPE. And truly, I think most people have not understood the serious impact that this has had on the healthcare sector. So I think it's very important for us to protect our private healthcare sector, keep it alive, understand its significant value in the entire ecosystem. 60 to 70% of high-end care is delivered in the private sector, if not more. And so it's important for us to find a way to protect and rejuvenate the private healthcare sector, not just make demands of the sector without supporting it.
To what extent has work from home helped keeping the services sector going?
Well, as I said, there are things you can do work from home. So those sectors have obviously benefited from it. But, and it's quite possible some of these things may remain back at home. I mean, we have all become much more used to doing, web-based conference calls or interviews and so on. Not so long ago, I would have perhaps driven across and done this face-to-face. I'm still prepared to do that. But I think many of us have now got used to doing it this way. And if this technology improves just a little bit, I think even the problems we now still have with connectivity, etc., disappear. I think it'll become quite routine for doing these remote interviews. Then we can use it in education. We can do it for meetings. We can do it for many other things.
Yes, so that is the opportunity part. Again, what I've said, written also, is that in these areas, the mass market, the place where we have to keep the restriction, make it completely free. No cost, you can all deliver home delivery. You can do sale through digital means, etc. All these little people who never thought of it, facilitate it. Okay, and it again connects to my digital market, a local market. Get entrepreneurs, get people to set up local markets. So if you can facilitate home delivery, digital stuff, I think this challenge can be made into an opportunity.
See, if you look at services from the IT sector, I think IT moved up to almost 70% capacity within 30 days of the lockdown. They were able to shift computers. The government was very proactive. In fact, I was at a video conferencing when Minister Piyush Goyal said, yes, you will be allowed to take electronic and electronic components, and they became part of essential services, not just food, but computers became part of essential services. Bandwidth was adequate in our country, and therefore service sector like IT was able to bounce back. But service sectors like hotel, aviation, and hospitality, like I told you, were on the other hand severely affected. Tourism. I mean, who's thinking of traveling to Taj Mahal right now? Very doubtful. So these are realities we need to understand. And I think holidays in a recent survey that we did of companies, when it was surveyed, how many of you are thinking of taking your family on a holiday in the next 12 months? Under 20% said yes.
Okay.
And this is, a group of individuals, the CEOs who we surveyed, where normally 75% of them took their family on a holiday once a year.
Okay.
So this is going to be a significant negative impact on the service sector, and we need to acknowledge that, appreciate it, while also appreciating that most services, whether it's our Indian hotels, which are well known all over the world, or Indian hospitals, these are essential for our overall economy. So we must protect those investments.
Banking has been crucial for the recovery, is going to be crucial as well for the recovery post-COVID. To what extent are banks factoring in risk at this time? Because there are potential risks, isn't it, to lending at a time like this?
So banks will have to play an important role. Finance is an important part of re-inflating the economy. But of course, banks will express some concerns that if they do lend to somebody at this time, there is, some of those loans may become NPAs in the future. But if every bank takes that view, then actually we will have a serious problem, because there'll be a liquidity crunch and we'll actually end up with much more NPAs. So while what may be true for an individual bank, if the banking sector as a whole becomes too cautious, it actually will trigger the problem. So given those concerns, obviously the government has to step in and help and handhold this sector in some ways. That is the context in which this 100% guarantee things as well. We have worked, for example, to create these buyer of last resort SPV for buying bonds of NBFCs and HFCs that you may remember. We have also created a 20% first loss guarantee. So these are different ways of essentially providing comfort to the sector to go out there and get the cash flow going again. Because unless cash flow begins to flow again, we will be stuck eternally in this, and eventually the banks themselves will hurt. So we need to get the cash flow going again, and the banks have to step up. But to encourage every bank to step up, one has to encourage, provide them various supports, which we, as I just discussed, we have tried to provide.
So banking is one of those essential services, and you're quite rightly, your first question was that these had by and large been maintained, not by and large, but to the extent they were required for essential services. But yes, I think these will have to be opened up. But again, because banks are a controlled environment, I think the spread of the virus can be minimized by instituting these measures of checking, enforcing masks, etc., and gradually opening up the physical part, because still we are not that digitized economy. There are many people who need to actually physically go to banks. I know of some older people who actually need to go but are not doing it.
To do so, yes.
But the younger person with appropriate masks, etc., some of them need to go to the bank and do their business. Yeah,
I think we need to understand that the banks, on the back of RBI's extremely friendly policy, have now parked 7.5 lakh crores with RBI back again. Okay. So they have money, but they are not lending. And we need to seriously find the methodology or the answer to this, because banks actually have lending power. They don't have spending power. Even if the banks give the money, it's not going to revive the industry. That is not demand generation. So while we have to ensure that the liquidity for the manufacturing, we also need money in the hands of people. So a combination has to be created for revival of the economy.
Labor displacements, we know even about migrant labor. How quickly can we work out, a new normal here? Perhaps because, you talked about decentralization, there could be re-employment in different areas, but or perhaps, go back to the stage where, they were all re-employed where they were earlier.
So I think, as with everything, I think we'll get a mix of them. Many of these workers went away because the factories they were working with were shut. Now, as we open those factories up, many of them will simply return, but that will obviously not necessarily happen to everybody. Some of them will probably stay back where they went back. The fact that we have now provided new opportunities and opened up the agriculture sector means that some of them may take advantage of that. Some of the origin states like Uttar Pradesh, etc., which had been the source of many of these labor, they have taken it upon themselves to attract investments into those states. So if that succeeds, then many of these workers will, rather than go to the recipient state, Uttar Pradesh or Bihar, and participate in new companies being done. In fact, the companies themselves will move there that they were working. So a lot of permutations and combinations will happen out of this. What is important through this is to maintain flexibility. One. Secondly, that when we begin to re-engage them, we make sure that we can formalize them as far as possible, and that this new sort of labor market pays far more attention than in the past to things like safety, working conditions, and things like that. So if you look at the labor law, the new set of 4 labor laws we have introduced, it does 2 things. One is it provides greater flexibility, on one hand, for deployment of labor. On the other hand, it encourages people to have formal contracts, because that is important for formalization. In this particular episode, we saw what happens without formalization. We didn't know where the workers were. Otherwise, we can provide them with direct support, but we can't. I mean, if the formalized workers, we provided them with EPF directly. But informal workers, how do you even reach out to them? So formalization is important for a variety of reasons, but also this. And then something we have historically been very lax about, we have strengthened that significantly. Working conditions and safety. We have to drag safety norms into the 21st century. We can't be in the 1949 kind of safety norm. So all of these are being modernized as we speak.
No, I think one can always have an optimistic or a pessimistic view. I tend towards the optimistic because I think of the policy needed to this thing. I think the natural instinct, there are two pressures on a person, a migrant who's gone back home. One is the fear that if I go back, I may be put in the same situation which I was when I left. The hope or the positive aspect is I need to go back to work. I need to earn. I want to, I had all these dreams for my family, etc. I need to earn and send them the money. Now, what the governments can do is to turn the balance, right? You cannot remove arbitrarily the fears of individuals. We are a free country. We are a democratic country. But there are these forces. So the force in a people's mind, right? To workers, whoever. So what the government, state governments and union governments can do is shift the balance, do whatever is possible to mitigate the fears and facilitate their return to work in a safer environment. So that's what I would do. And I think if we do that, we can get a lot more of them back into work.
So on this, I think the television has been full of extremely, sad stories of migrants going back home. But really, of the 70 million interstate migrants, 40 million are dependents, and the rest are the labor force. And of the labor force, of the 500 million, 3 to 4 million of them have gone back home. Labor shortages are actually not the binding constraint for India to get back to normalcy. Here and there, you do see pockets of it, but employers are being creative. Some are chartering flights to bring their people back home. Some are sending buses, and others are actually building housing for their employees to say, from now on, I never want to have this problem or disruption.
You did mention about travel and tourism being badly impacted. What do you see about the recovery here? How are these sectors going to recover? And there's also price sensitivity involved, pent-up demand. Is there going to be some sort of regulation as well?
So there will be pent-up demand. I mean, there is travel and tourism. They are separate things.
Okay.
Which is basically airline. We have temporarily placed some controls so that there's no price gouging and so on at a time where we have deliberately restricted the pipeline. As the pipeline is widened and we go back to normal, we will also remove all these restrictions, and then it will become permanently, how it used to be, and it will be market determined. Now, tourism is more complicated because travel can happen because of business, it can happen people going back home, whatever other practical reasons why people travel. But tourism is a more complicated thing because it is by nature discretionary. Now, it is not the case that tourism will, we are not going to go back to having holidays. Human beings love to travel, and we will go back. But it is the case that in the medium term, it may take some momentum to get back to where it was. International travel, for example, may be disrupted for a prolonged period of time, both inward and outward. And in this situation, we may have to look at our own tourists to travel more, and so on and so forth. And whatever support is needed for this sector will be provided.
Absolutely. I think these will take much longer to recover. I mentioned that in most other sectors, I expect normalization to start from September onwards. But in this case, I don't expect it, what I would call normalization of some character to start before the next financial year. So really, there are coping strategies which they have to adopt. For example, if they can survive one of the suggestions for airlines is leave a seat empty. Yeah. Is it possible for them to do that and still survive? If they can, they should do that. So these kind of survival strategies for restaurants, for example, in the US, they are building these plastic shields, right? Mm-hmm. So, or restaurants which have an open area or a terrace, those can open faster. So we have to think carefully about how to facilitate it without affecting this basic goal of minimizing deaths and cases. So I think It is possible. We can facilitate it, but it's going to take some more time than for the production sector.
So clearly there's pent-up demand. I mean, some of our people have started moving and it's difficult to get a flight ticket.
Yes.
Many flights are going full. So I think a steady opening up of that area is important. I believe that adding more flights across while maintaining safety norms is important. We need to map also zones which are not in the red. So while we open up, again, I had reiterated the importance of granular and very localized lockdowns. If we do that, so Hyderabad city or Chennai city should not be in lockdown, but Coimbatore or different districts or different localities of those cities should be in lockdown. In that type of environment, you can create a more rapid opening up of the markets, and it is very important for us to get aviation back. So all areas where we cannot practice social distancing and which are not extremely essential, I think are going to stay shut for a while longer for the safety of the country. The next 1-2 months, what we really don't want is another lockdown. So let's not rush into things where we are risking lives without an appropriate uptick. So for restaurants, I think food service delivery at home, and all restaurants are innovating. Their kitchens are cooking. They're charging actually the same thing, but the customer's going and picking up the product and then eating it at home with social distancing. So some of these are part of the new normal. They will last for a while, and hopefully the days will come back where you can go back into restaurants. But for now, I think it's going to take a while.
Well, let's take a look at the role of government. Government is also a service, public administration. Would you say that, the government has to play a significant role at this time? Ease of doing business, policy framework, these kind of things?
Yes, the government plays an important role in these situations in two ways. One is that its own spending and support that it's providing provides demand to the system. So whether it's in terms of providing the very poor with direct transfers and so on, that is one part of it. Other part is you build you begin to rebuild infrastructure. That's another way of generating demand. So there is the whole gamut of things that the governments can do in these situations to re-establish domestic demand. So that's one. The second large part we want to do is to bring back confidence in the private sector, which is ultimately the source of economic growth. It's not in the longer term. You have to see private sector coming up, creating jobs, creating investments, and so on. And in this context, you need ease of doing business. You need to open up new sectors, which we are doing, as you saw in mining, we are doing that. But there are other areas like defense also, we are doing that. And of course, you need to change the incentive structures. That is the context in which you lower taxes, keep it as simple as possible, and hope that both domestic but also foreign investors, companies find it worthwhile to come to India and set up businesses.
I think the health bureaucracy and so on, police, we should think of reforms reform and expansion, but reformed expansion. Just expansion by itself is not a good idea because you multiply both the good and the bad parts.
I think that, the government has really been extremely active during the COVID. There's been a lot of activity in the state as well as the central. Many of the policy moves which have been taken have really also been an appreciation of the fact that to revive industry, giving direct cash benefits is not the only way to support industry. Supporting through policy has been one of the underlying strategies of the economic revival package. And I think this trend is continuing.
A final question is, how will this revival package boost capacities, both production as well as in services, as well as create jobs?
So far what we have been doing is to try and provide a cushion. So we have done it at multiple levels. There is no point in doing a very large demand rollout when you yourself have deliberately shut down the whole system through a lockdown. Right? After all, the lockdown is what? It's basically deliberate demand suppression. Yeah. So as we open it up, some demand will anyway come. And that is indeed happening right around you. You will see people, there are cars are back, some factories are back, and so on. There are certain areas like malls, etc., which we haven't opened, but other things quickly. And so that demand is coming back. Now the point is, once we have removed all these demand suppression mechanisms at the end of lockdown 4 or whatever it is, then at that juncture, there is a case for looking at, if necessary, further demand measures. Now, in the case of India, you can do fiscal measures, but you could also do a lot of monetary measures. In fact, while, contrary to popular belief, we do have some fiscal space. Our debt to GDP ratios are not as high as many other countries. So if necessary, we will provide fiscal resources. But a lot of space is available on the monetary side. In many countries around the world, interest rates are now basically at zero. There's not much thing they can do on the monetary side. That is not the case in India. We can lower interest rates substantially in India. Even the government itself is still borrowing at 6% for 10-year paper. Clearly, we can make that lower. If government is borrowing at 6, there are many companies that are still borrowing 8, 9, 10, even higher than 10%. If those interest rates are brought down significantly, that suddenly changes the dynamics of building infrastructure, investing in heavy capacities, and so on. So this is something that we should exploit, the fact that we have monetary space. And this happens to be at a time where, incidentally, there is plenty of free capital available in the rest of the world. So the US Fed has clearly signaled that for the next 2 years, they are not going to be tightening monetary policy. What does that mean? It means that there is large amounts of cheap capital available in the rest of the world. We should take advantage of it. This is again the context in which we are trying to make it easier to invest into India. As you will know, we have done recent changes in the government bond regulation. We can now be included in global bond indices. So that's just one way in which we could get stable money coming into India.
I think that no interview in this time is complete without once again reiterating to all your viewers that we have to stay safe. And the primary responsibility for staying safe is not on the government. It's not on the hospitals or healthcare workers. It's not even on industries or employers. It's on the individual. So please let individuals understand the importance of wearing their mask, importance of social distancing, and the importance of washing your hands. Being a healthcare person, I cannot re-emphasize that more. And most importantly, to protect your elderly, because they are the most vulnerable at this point of time. And also, let us not fear the virus. Let us be cautious and careful and take precautions, but not fearful or anxious, because ultimately, everybody can, like most people can survive the virus. The death rate in India is under 3%. So let's be careful, but let us not bring our country to a grinding halt in this fear of the unknown. Let's stay educated and very intelligent about how we deal with this.
So services, which has been severely disrupted because of COVID, has begun adjusting to the new normal. There are some areas within services which are doing reasonably well and are positioned to do well under the new normal. But other sectors need to readjust, maybe need to move into a more digital economy format. We thank our guests for being with us, Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal, Dr. Arvind Veermani, and Dr. Sangeeta Reddy. And thank you very much for watching. Namaskar.